On a winter night in the heart of Nebraska, in a modest roadside diner no different from 100 others, a single moment would tear open the past and rewrite the future. A child's voice in a foreign tongue, a mother's guarded eyes, and a powerful man who had spent years searching for the family he lost. If stories of healing and second chances speak to your heart, consider subscribing and joining us on this journey. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above the cracked linoleum floor of Miller's Diner, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon. Sarah Miller had worked here for 6 years, her apron faded and her hands often chapped from endless scrubbing of dishes. But to her, this little diner in rural Nebraska was not a place of despair. It was survival. It was the only way she could raise her daughter Emma with dignity. Emma, 6 years old, sat in the corner booth by the window, her homework spread out beside a plate of untouched pancakes. Her light brown hair caught the glow of the neon sign outside, and her lips moved silently as she read words beyond her age. Sarah glanced at her often, heart swelling with both pride and guilt. Pride, because Emma was brilliant, able to memorize entire stories after hearing them once. Guilt, because the girl's childhood was measured in late-night shifts and quiet corners instead of playgrounds and picnics. The bell above the door jingled as another customer stepped in. Sarah turned with her practiced smile, but it faltered when she saw her. The woman was striking, tall, elegant, dressed in a charcoal gray suit. Her jet-black hair was tied neatly, her steps precise, her presence unmistakably foreign. She was Japanese, her accent sharp as she asked for water. Sarah nodded, poured a glass, and set it down. But moments later, the woman's hand trembled. She pressed it to her chest. Her breaths grew shallow, uneven. Her voice broke into desperate syllables. "Tasukete, tasukete, onegai shimasu." Her Japanese words tumbled out like waves, but inside the diner, no one understood. The truckers at the counter looked up, confused, and then looked away. Sarah froze. She wanted to help, but she couldn't decipher the frantic words. Then, to her astonishment, Emma slid from the booth and hurried over. The small girl looked up at the stranger with wide, steady eyes and said in perfect Japanese, "Daijobu desu ka? Watashi wa tetsudaimasu." "Are you okay? I will help you." The entire diner fell silent. Forks clinked against plates. Conversations stalled. The elegant woman's gaze softened through her panic, her eyes fixed on the little girl. Emma continued in fluid Japanese, her voice calm, soothing, guiding the woman through breathing slowly, telling her help was near. Sarah's heart pounded. She knew her daughter loved books and had somehow taught herself fragments of languages from the old library's dusty shelves. But this was fluency, spoken with the clarity of someone who had lived the language. In the corner booth, a man sat very still, his hand tightening around a porcelain coffee cup. His name was David Johnson. He was in his early 40s, dressed simply in a flannel shirt and jeans, though anyone with keen eyes might have sensed the weight of authority in his posture. To the rest of the diner, he looked like a businessman passing through town. But behind the disguise lay one of Chicago's most powerful CEOs, a man who had built an empire of steel and glass. And yet, David Johnson was not in Nebraska for business. He was searching, always searching. 7 years had passed since the day he was forced to abandon the woman he loved and the child he never knew. Tonight, watching this small girl speak Japanese with impossible grace, something inside him jolted. The woman's panic subsided, her breaths steadying under Emma's gentle coaching. Sarah rushed forward, wrapping her arms protectively around her daughter, her eyes flicking toward the man in the flannel shirt. She noticed his gaze lingered too long on Emma, and instinctively she drew her closer. "Thank you, sweetheart," Sarah whispered in English, pressing a kiss to Emma's temple. To the Japanese woman, she added, "We'll call an ambulance. You'll be okay." But the woman shook her head, embarrassed, insisting she was fine now. With a trembling smile, she placed her hand over Emma's and whispered in Japanese, "Anata watenshi. You are an angel." David couldn't take his eyes off the scene. The timbre of Emma's voice, the shape of her eyes, even the way she tilted her head. It all clawed at his memory. It was as though he were staring at a mirror of his younger self, hidden within a little girl. His throat tightened. Could it be? No. And yet... Emma returned to her booth, unaware of the storm she had unleashed in two adults' hearts. Sarah leaned against the counter, exhaling shakily. The woman left quietly, bowing in gratitude, but the moment lingered. David finally rose. His steps were measured as he approached Sarah. "Your daughter," he said, his voice low. "She speaks Japanese fluently?" Sarah stiffened, gripping the coffee pot in her hand. "She reads. She learns quickly. That's all." David studied her face, the wariness in her eyes, the invisible wall she erected between him and the child. He knew that wall well. It was built of hurt, betrayal, and long years of surviving alone. He wanted to speak more, to ask questions that had burned in his chest for years, but he swallowed them, forcing a polite nod. "She's remarkable," he murmured. Then he returned to his table, left a generous tip, and walked out into the cold night. Sarah watched him go, unease prickling at her skin. Men with that kind of presence never simply passed through, and the way he had looked at Emma, it was as though he saw something she herself had tried to protect, something buried in the shadows of the past. Outside, David stood by his car, staring into the Nebraska night. Snowflakes drifted slowly from the black sky. He clenched his fists, whispering to himself, "It can't be. Or maybe." The memory of Sarah's laughter from years ago pierced through him, along with the hollow silence that had followed when he left. Inside the diner, Emma returned to her books, her small fingers tracing Japanese characters she had memorized from a borrowed dictionary. She looked up and smiled at her mother. "Mama, I like helping people. Did I do okay?" Sarah knelt, cupping her daughter's face. "You did more than okay, baby. You were brave." But as Sarah hugged Emma tightly, her heart ached with a fear she couldn't name. Somewhere, she felt the past shifting, opening, and threatening to walk back into their fragile lives. And in the shadows of the Nebraska night, David Johnson knew he had just found a thread of truth he could no longer ignore. The morning sun broke through a gauzy curtain of clouds, spilling pale light across the Nebraska plains. For most people, it was an ordinary day. For Sarah Miller, it was the kind of day that carried quiet dread, because she knew the man in the flannel shirt from the night before had not simply been a traveler. Emma woke early, already at the kitchen table with her notebooks. Her tiny fingers traced unfamiliar alphabets, her lips forming sounds from languages Sarah herself had never studied. Greek, Russian, Arabic. Emma picked them up from the library's old textbooks, or from the rare tourist who passed through town. It was a gift Sarah could not understand, but felt compelled to protect. "Sweetheart, eat your eggs before they get cold," Sarah said, setting a plate in front of her. Emma smiled absent-mindedly, repeating a phrase in French as if it were a melody. Sarah sighed, brushing back her daughter's hair. Sometimes she feared the world would notice too soon. Sometimes she feared the wrong person already had. That afternoon, when Sarah arrived at the diner for her shift, she froze. The man was back. David Johnson sat in the same corner booth, a plain cup of coffee before him, His gaze was calm, steady, but his presence was undeniable. He did not belong in a diner where the most expensive item was $9.99. Sarah tightened her grip on her apron strings. "Back again?" she asked carefully. David offered a polite nod. "I was passing through." His eyes flicked toward Emma, who was once again tucked into the booth with her books. "And I wanted to hear more from your daughter." Sarah's chest tightened. "She's just a child. People come here to eat, not study her." "I understand," David said gently, though there was an undercurrent of something else in his tone. "But last night, what she did, it wasn't ordinary." Before Sarah could respond, Emma piped up from across the room, her voice carrying clearly. "Mama, listen. In Japanese, this means good morning." She looked at David shyly. "Ohayo gozaimasu." David's expression shifted. The words were flawless, the accent perfect. For a man who had spent years negotiating with international partners, he recognized mastery when he heard it. He leaned forward slightly. "And in French?" he asked softly, as if testing the edges of a secret. Emma tilted her head, then answered without hesitation. "Bonjour, monsieur." Her small mouth curved into a grin. "It's easy, see?" Sarah stepped between them. "Enough, Emma. Back to your homework." The girl pouted, but obeyed. David sat back, his eyes never leaving the child. There it was again. The tilt of her head, the cadence of her voice. They mirrored someone he had once loved with every part of his being. Later, when the diner slowed, Sarah carried plates to the counter. David took the chance to speak again. "Your daughter, she reminds me of someone." Sarah stiffened. "You don't know us." "Maybe not," David admitted. "But I know brilliance when I see it. She's gifted beyond measure." He paused, choosing his words. "Children like her, they need doors opened. Opportunities most never see." Sarah turned sharply, eyes flashing. "So what? You think because you wear nice clothes and talk smooth, you can stroll in here and change her life?" David held her gaze, unflinching. "No. I think because she deserves it. I think because you can't hide her light forever. The world will notice." Her throat constricted. He was right, and she hated him for it. She had kept Emma's world small for a reason, because attention always came with strings attached. Emma peeked around the counter, sensing the tension. She patted over, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mama, it's okay. I like learning. I want to learn everything." She turned to David, eyes wide and unguarded. "Do you know more languages too?" The question struck him like a blade. He remembered nights years ago, sitting beside a woman with golden hair, teaching her how to say "I love you" in different tongues, laughing at their mispronunciations, dreaming of a family filled with curiosity. He swallowed hard. "A few," he managed, forcing a smile. "But not as many as you." Emma giggled, satisfied. She returned to her booth, humming softly in a language Sarah couldn't even identify. That evening, when the last customers had left, Sarah found David still sitting at his booth, his coffee long gone cold. She crossed her arms. "You've had your curiosity satisfied. Time to move on." David rose slowly, sliding his wallet back into his jacket. "You're protective. I respect that." He hesitated, his voice quieter now. "But sometimes, the very thing we fear losing is the thing we never had the courage to claim." Sarah's breath caught, though she quickly masked it. "Don't speak in riddles, mister. We don't need your kind of help." David looked at her one last time, his expression unreadable. "Maybe not. But someday soon she'll need more than what this town can give. Then he walked out into the Nebraska dusk, leaving Sarah shaken. That night, Sarah tucked Emma into bed. The little girl clutched her battered notebook to her chest. "Mama, do you think I can go to a big school someday, where they teach every language in the world?" Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, her heart breaking at the hope in her eyes. "Someday, baby. Someday." As Emma drifted to sleep, Sarah sat in the dark, staring out the window at the endless horizon. She thought of the man in the diner, of his piercing eyes and the way he looked at her daughter, not with pity, but with recognition. And for the first time in years, she feared the past was about to come knocking. The steel and glass towers of Chicago's Loop rose like a crown above the city. From the top floor of Johnson International's headquarters, David Johnson should have felt triumphant. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond his corner office, Lake Michigan gleaming like a sheet of polished silver. Yet the weight pressing on his chest was heavier than any skyscraper. The boardroom smelled faintly of leather and old money. 12 directors sat around the polished walnut table, their eyes fixed on David. They had built him into their king, the youngest CEO in the company's century-long history, a man who had multiplied their fortunes. But tonight, as they discussed a billion-dollar merger with Tanaka Industries, David's mind drifted far from stock valuations and legal clauses. It lingered on a little girl in a Nebraska diner, her lips shaping flawless Japanese words. "David," barked Gregory Hale, the chief financial officer, "you're quiet. Are we aligned on this acquisition or not?" David straightened, realizing the silence in the room was his. "Yes," he said evenly, though his voice felt hollow. "The merger is strategically sound. I'll review the final terms with legal counsel." The directors exchanged satisfied nods. Numbers mattered. Emotions did not. But as the meeting dragged on, David's mind betrayed him. He saw Emma's small fingers tracing characters on a notebook, her eyes bright with curiosity. He saw Sarah standing protectively at her side, the same stubborn fire she once carried when they were younger, when he had promised her forever. He had broken that promise, and the wound never healed. When the meeting ended, David retreated to his office. The city lights flickered on below, tiny constellations spread across the darkening streets. He loosened his tie and leaned against the floor-to-ceiling window. His reflection stared back at him, a man in a tailored suit, admired, envied, and utterly alone. 7 years. 7 years since the night he had been summoned by his late father's attorneys and told in no uncertain terms, marry into power or lose everything. The board had feared scandal, feared weakness, feared that his relationship with a small-town waitress named Sarah Miller would tarnish the empire. David, cornered, had chosen ambition over love. Or perhaps love had been torn from him by the ruthless machinery of legacy, and yet, sitting in that diner, he had felt time collapse. Sarah's eyes had burned with the same defiance. Emma's voice had carried his rhythm, his timbre, his blood. For the first time in years, success tasted like ash. That night, David attended a gala at the Art Institute of Chicago. Cameras flashed as he stepped onto the marble staircase, journalists calling his name. To the world, he was flawless. The widowed visionary, the man with no scandals, the architect of wealth. Inside, champagne flutes clinked. Hiroshi Tanaka, the Japanese billionaire behind Tanaka Industries, greeted him with a measured bow. "Johnson-san," he said smoothly, "our future together is bright. Your board is eager. Soon we will rule 2 continents. David forced a polite smile. "Yes." "But the brightest futures aren't always measured in balance sheets." Hiroshi's eyes narrowed with curiosity. "Then what do you measure them by?" David hesitated. For years, his answer would have been obvious: growth, power, dominance. But now another image haunted him: a little girl calling out "Ohayo gozaimasu" in perfect Japanese. He looked Hiroshi in the eye. Legacy, the kind that lives beyond us. The older man tilted his head but said nothing. Later, alone in his penthouse overlooking the lake, David poured a glass of whiskey he didn't touch. He walked through the rooms, immaculate, lifeless. No toys scattered across the floor, no laughter echoing from the halls, just silence and glass. He paused at a framed photograph on his desk. It was old, hidden behind files. Sarah's smile, her hand resting on his shoulder during their college days. He had never shown it to anyone. It was his reminder of what he had lost and what he had sacrificed. The question gnawed at him. Had Sarah ever told their child who he was? Did Emma know her father's name? His phone buzzed with an email from Gregory Hale. Final merger draft attached. Sign by morning. David didn't open it. Instead, he stared out at the city and whispered to himself, "What good is conquering the world if you lose your soul?" The next morning at 5 a.m., David was already at the gym in the building's private suite. His trainer barked instructions, but his thoughts wandered. Each rep felt meaningless. Each victory in business felt hollow. The drive that had once fueled him now felt like chains. By 8 a.m., he sat in a boardroom again, lawyers dissecting clauses. His pen hovered above the dotted line. The merger would secure his empire for decades, ensure his name was etched into corporate history. But as he lowered the pen, he remembered Emma's voice, clear and innocent. "Do you know more languages, too?" His hand trembled. He set the pen down. The directors exchanged puzzled looks, but David excused himself with a tight smile. He walked out into the Chicago morning air, leaving billions on the table. For the rest of the day, he roamed the city streets like a man untethered. He walked past Millennium Park, past children skating on the ice rink, their laughter filling the air. He paused near the Bean, where tourists snapped photos. He saw fathers lifting children onto their shoulders, mothers bundling scarves tighter around small faces. The ache in his chest deepened. He had wealth beyond imagination, yet not a single moment like that to call his own. That evening, he stood before the mirror in his penthouse bathroom. The man staring back at him was immaculate, every hair in place, every line of his suit sharp. But his eyes were hollow. "You're a CEO," he told his reflection. "But what are you to her?" The question reverberated like a verdict. That night, David sat at his desk, laptop open but untouched. He began to write, not contracts, not memos, but a letter, to Sarah, to Emma. Words he had swallowed for 7 years poured onto the page. Apologies, regrets, promises. He did not know if he would ever send it, but for the first time, he admitted to himself what he truly wanted. Not the merger, not the empire. He wanted a family. He wanted his daughter to know his name. And that desire terrified him more than any hostile takeover ever had. The prairie wind whistled low across the flat Nebraska land, carrying with it the faint scent of hay and dust. In Miller's diner, the coffee was hot, the chatter steady, and life went on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But Sarah knew better. Ever since the night Emma had spoken perfect Japanese to a stranger, her world felt less safe. She had lived the past 7 years on instinct, working long hours, keeping her circle small, and guarding her daughter like a lioness. Emma's brilliance was a gift, but it was also a magnet. And now a man who clearly wasn't what he seemed had noticed. That morning, when Sarah pushed open the diner's back door, she wasn't surprised to find David Johnson already there, seated in the corner booth with a cup of black coffee. He looked casual, but his posture carried authority. He wasn't a man who belonged in a roadside cafe. He was a man used to making the world bend to him. Sarah approached with a tight smile. "Third day in a row. We don't usually keep regulars in suits." David glanced up, his gaze warm but steady. "Then maybe it's time you did." Before Sarah could fire back, Emma bounded in behind her, clutching her worn notebook. "Mama, can I sit here? It's quieter." She slid into the booth across from David, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Sarah hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. She delivered coffee to another table, but her ears stayed fixed on the exchange. "Emma," David said softly, as though speaking to something fragile. "What are you working on today?" The girl opened her notebook proudly. "Arabic. I learned that in the library books, but it's hard." She pointed to lines of script written in a surprisingly steady hand. "See? This one says peace." David leaned closer, his heart pounding. He could see her concentration, her meticulous effort. She reminded him of himself at her age, obsessed with learning, eager to conquer languages, hungry for knowledge beyond reach. "You're extraordinary," he said sincerely. Emma giggled. "Mama says I'm just curious." At that, Sarah returned, setting down plates with unnecessary force. "Curious, yes. Ordinary, yes. She's a child, Mr. Johnson. That's all." David looked at her, the shadow of regret flickering in his eyes. "She deserves more than ordinary." Later that afternoon, when Emma was outside skipping along the sidewalk, David pulled Sarah aside. "Let me help her. She has a mind that could change the world. I can sponsor her education, get her into schools where she belongs." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Belongs? She belongs with me. She belongs in a home where she's loved, not paraded like some child prodigy for rich men to brag about." David didn't flinch at her venom. "It's not about bragging. It's about giving her opportunities that can't be found in a small-town library." Sarah crossed her arms, her eyes hard as flint. "I won't let my daughter become someone's charity case. She is not a project. She is not a prize, and she will never be your tax write-off." Her words cut deep, but David remained calm. "That's not what I'm offering. I see her potential. I see what she could become." "You see what you want," Sarah shot back. "But I see who she already is. She's my daughter. She's kind and brave and happy with the little she has. That's enough for me." Outside, Emma was kneeling in the dirt, showing a beetle to another little girl from town. She explained, in a blend of English and Spanish, the insect's parts, laughing as the other child squealed. To Emma, languages weren't trophies. They were bridges. They were ways of making friends, of understanding people. When Sarah stepped out and called her name, Emma rushed over, cheeks flushed with joy. "Mama, guess what? I taught Lucy how to say hola. She laughed so much." Sarah's anger softened. She knelt, brushing the dust from Emma's dress. "Sweetheart, you don't need big schools or fancy teachers. You're already learning everything you need." Emma's eyes lit with innocence. "But Mama, I want to learn everything in the world. Isn't that what you always told me? That learning is freedom?" Sarah's heart twisted. Yes, she had told her that. But she hadn't expected her daughter to dream so big, so soon. That evening, David stood by his rental car, watching from a distance as Sarah walked Emma home. Their small apartment above the laundromat glowed with a single warm light in the window. He saw Emma press her face to the glass, nose smudging the pane, her laughter carrying faintly into the street. The scene pierced him. This was the family he had lost, the life he had once imagined but never lived. When Sarah came back outside to hang laundry on the line, she spotted him. For a moment, they just stared across the gravel lot, the space between them heavy with unspoken history. Finally, she spoke, her voice sharp. "Stop coming here, David. You can't buy your way into our lives." He took a step forward. "It isn't money, Sarah. It's a chance." "For her? For Emma?" Sarah shook her head, her hair catching the porch light. "Emma doesn't need saving. And I don't need reminding. Whatever you think you're doing, it ends here." With that, she turned back inside, slamming the door behind her. Inside the apartment, Emma was already curled in bed, her notebook tucked under her pillow. Sarah sat on the edge, smoothing her daughter's hair as she slept. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You'll grow up strong, baby girl. Strong enough to never need anyone to hand you the world. You'll build it yourself." Tears stung her eyes, but pride steadied her heart. She would protect Emma from men who thought they could fix things with money. She would raise her daughter to believe in her own worth, not in the handouts of strangers. Outside, David lingered by his car, staring up at the glowing window. He could feel the walls Sarah had built around herself and her daughter. And yet, when he thought of Emma's eyes, bright, fearless, and familiar, he knew he couldn't simply walk away. For the first time in years, David Johnson, CEO of one of the largest corporations in America, felt powerless. And in that powerlessness, he felt something even more dangerous: hope. The letter came in a plain white envelope, its edges worn from the long journey through the mail system. Sarah had never seen a letterhead so official: University of Chicago Medical Center. Her stomach tightened as she opened it, fearing some mistake had been made. Inside was a formal request. The hospital's Department of Child Neurocognitive Research was conducting a study on exceptional children in the Midwest. Emma had been nominated by her school librarian, who had witnessed the girl's uncanny ability to devour entire language textbooks in a single week. At first, Sarah considered throwing it away. She had no desire to parade her daughter in front of strangers, but Emma's eyes sparkled when she read the invitation. "Mama, they want me to come. Please, just once. I want to know what I can really do." Sarah hesitated. Protectiveness battled with pride. Finally, she agreed. A week later, Sarah and Emma boarded a bus bound for Chicago. The city rose like a steel forest, intimidating yet exhilarating. Emma's nose pressed to the window, wide-eyed at the skyscrapers. Sarah held her daughter's hand tightly, praying she hadn't made a mistake. At the hospital, they were greeted by Dr. May Chen, a gentlewoman with dark hair tied back neatly. Her glasses perched on her nose. "Mrs. Miller, Emma, thank you for coming. We'll only do some non-invasive assessments. Nothing to fear." Emma beamed, eager to begin. Sarah forced a smile, though unease prickled her skin. The tests stretched across hours. Emma solved puzzles meant for graduate students. She recited vocabulary lists after a single glance. She switched between English, Japanese, French, and Spanish as easily as other children switched crayons. When presented with abstract reasoning problems, she leapt to answers in seconds. Sarah watched through the glass, heart swelling with pride and trembling with dread. She saw Dr. Chen scribble notes furiously, whispering to her assistants. Finally, the session ended. Emma skipped out, tired but smiling. "Mama, it was fun. They gave me words I didn't even know." Dr. Chen ushered Sarah into her office. The blinds were drawn, the desk stacked with papers. She removed her glasses, speaking with quiet awe. "Mrs. Miller, your daughter is unlike any child I've ever studied. Her IQ is estimated at over 180. She demonstrates a rare form of hyper-polyglot ability, an innate capacity for languages. This is not learned alone. This is genetic." Sarah's heart stopped. Genetic? Yes. Dr. Chen's gaze softened. Such gifts are usually inherited. May I ask, what of her father? Sarah's throat tightened. Memories she had buried clawed their way back. He's not part of our lives. Dr. Chen hesitated, then handed her a printed summary. You should know, Mrs. Miller, children like Emma don't come along often. She could be a bridge between cultures. She could change the world. Sarah clutched the report with trembling fingers. Change the world. She only wanted her daughter safe. That evening, as they left the hospital, Sarah spotted a familiar figure leaning against a sleek black sedan. David Johnson. He stepped forward, his expression a storm of control and longing. Sarah, he said, his voice low, may I speak with you? She stiffened. Not here. But Emma, ever unafraid, ran up to him. Hi again. Did you know today I learned Russian letters? Look. She scribbled them in the air with her finger, laughing. David's chest ached. Her brightness was undeniable. He crouched, lowering himself to her height. You're remarkable, Emma. Do you know that? She giggled. Mama says I'm just curious. David looked up at Sarah then, his eyes burning with something deeper. Curiosity like that doesn't come from nowhere. It's in her blood. Sarah's breath caught. Don't! But Emma tilted her head, frowning. Mama, Daddy's name was Johnson, wasn't it? I remember you said once. The words hit like thunder. Sarah froze. David's face went pale, his entire body trembling. What did you say? His voice cracked, betraying the control he always carried. Emma repeated innocently, You told me once, Mama. Daddy's name was Johnson. The world seemed to stop. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she couldn't hold back. David staggered back a step, his hand pressed to his chest. For years he had lived in boardrooms and penthouses, convinced he had lost everything. Now, before him, was proof. A daughter. Flesh and blood. Sarah, David whispered, his voice breaking. She's mine, isn't she? Sarah shook her head. Torn between fury and despair. This is why I didn't want you near her. You left. You chose them over us. David's eyes burned. I never stopped thinking of you. I never even knew. Don't lie to me. Sarah's voice was sharp, but her hands shook. Emma looked between them, confusion in her eyes. Mama, what's happening? Why are you crying? Sarah knelt, clutching her daughter tightly. Nothing, baby. Nothing. But David's voice trembled as he whispered again, She's mine. That night in their small Chicago motel, Sarah sat awake. The report from Dr. Chen spread across the bed. Emma slept soundly, curled against her mother's side, innocence untouched by the storm brewing outside. Sarah traced the words with her finger. IQ 180. Hyper-polyglot. Genetic markers strong. She thought of David's face when Emma had spoken. The way his voice had cracked, the way his eyes had filled with tears. For 7 years, Sarah had told herself he abandoned her, that he had chosen power and wealth over love, but now, doubt gnawed at her. Could it be true? That he never knew Emma existed? She brushed her lips against her daughter's forehead, whispering a vow. No matter what happens, I will protect you, even from the truth. But deep inside, she feared the truth was already breaking free. The motel room smelled faintly of detergent and dust, its yellow lamp casting long shadows across the faded wallpaper. Sarah sat rigid on the edge of the bed, her arms wrapped tightly around Emma, who had fallen asleep with her notebook clutched to her chest. but Sarah's eyes were wide open, her heart pounding like a drum that refused to quiet. The words Emma had spoken still echoed in her mind. Daddy's name was Johnson. Sarah had whispered that name only once, years ago, when Emma had asked why she didn't have a father like the other children. She had never expected the girl to remember, and she had certainly never expected David Johnson, the man who had broken her heart, to appear in their lives again. Now he knew, and nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, as they stepped out of the motel, David was waiting by his car. He looked nothing like the casual stranger who had walked into the diner days ago. His eyes were fierce, restless, almost desperate. "Sarah," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Not in front of her. Sarah's hand tightened protectively around Emma's shoulder. "There's nothing to talk about." David's jaw flexed. "There's everything to talk about." Emma looked up at them, sensing the storm. "Mama, are we mad at him?" Sarah forced a smile. "No, baby, just... come on, we're leaving." She led her daughter away, but David's voice followed them down the street. 7 years ago, I never had a choice. You think I wanted to walk away? You think I forgot you? Sarah, there are things you don't know." Sarah stopped cold. For years, she had carried the belief that David had abandoned her for ambition. Now his words cracked that certainty. Slowly, she turned. "Then tell me. Tell me what was worth leaving us." They met later that afternoon in a quiet cafe near the hospital. Emma stayed with a volunteer program for children, leaving Sarah and David alone at last. David sat across from her, his hands folded tightly on the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice that trembled despite his usual authority, he began. 7 years ago, my father was dying. The board feared scandal. They told me, if I didn't end things with you, if I didn't marry into the Cole family, they would destroy everything my family had built. They threatened you, Sarah. They said they would make sure you never worked again, that you'd be smeared in the press, ruined. I thought walking away was the only way to protect you. Sarah's eyes filled with fury and disbelief. Protect me? You left me alone, pregnant with nothing. You didn't even say goodbye. Do you know what that felt like? David's voice cracked. I thought if I stayed, they would crush us both. I believed silence would keep you safe. And then, when I tried to come back, you were gone. I searched, Sarah. I searched everywhere. Sarah shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. All I saw was betrayal. You disappeared, and every night I told myself Emma didn't need a father who could vanish so easily. David's face crumpled. I didn't know about her. Not until now. If I had known... He trailed off, swallowing hard. God, Sarah, I would have fought harder. I would have chosen differently. For a long time, silence stretched between them, thick with years of pain. Finally, Sarah whispered, So, all this time, you never knew you had a daughter. David shook his head, his eyes wet. Not until she spoke. Not until I saw myself in her. That evening, back at the motel, Sarah sat with Emma on the bed. She brushed her daughter's hair, trying to keep her voice steady. Baby, do you know why Mama sometimes gets sad when people talk about daddies? Emma nodded softly. Because Daddy went away. Sarah's hands stilled. Yes, he went away. But now he knows about you. Emma's eyes shimmered. So, Daddy never knew I was here? Sarah's heart broke at the innocence in her daughter's voice. No, sweetheart. He didn't know. Emma's lips trembled. So he didn't leave me. He just didn't know me? Tears blurred Sarah's vision. She pulled Emma into her arms, whispering, "That's right. He didn't know." For the first time, Emma cried for the father she had never had, and Sarah cried with her, mourning 7 years of silence. Meanwhile, David stood at the window of his penthouse in Chicago, staring at the lights of the city. His reflection stared back at him, an image of success, power, and emptiness. In his hand, he held Dr. Chen's report, which he had somehow obtained. He read the words again and again: IQ above 180, genetic markers strong. His chest ached with pride and regret. This was his daughter, his blood, his legacy. And yet the board had already begun to whisper. Gregory Hale had cornered him after the last meeting, voice low and threatening. "Be careful, David. Personal scandals sink empires. If anyone finds out about a secret child, the merger dies, and so do you." David had nodded outwardly, but inside he raged. The empire he had built was now the very cage keeping him from the family he wanted. The next weekend, Sarah allowed David to take Emma for a walk in Millennium Park. She watched from a distance as Emma laughed, tugging David toward the ice rink. He stumbled clumsily on skates while she glided easily, her laughter ringing through the air like bells. It was the first time Emma called him Daddy. Sarah's heart twisted. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to protect her daughter from heartbreak. But seeing them together, she couldn't deny the truth. Emma had found a missing piece of herself. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Sarah stood by the motel window staring out at the city. David approached quietly. "You don't know how much I regret," he whispered. "But I swear to you, Sarah, I won't walk away again, no matter what it costs." Sarah turned, her eyes fierce through her tears. "Words are cheap, David. You left once. You may leave again." David shook his head. "Not this time. They can take my company. They can take my title. But I won't let them take my family again." For the first time, Sarah saw the truth in his eyes. But trust, once broken, is not easily restored. The January wind cut sharp through the Chicago streets, scattering paper cups and swirling grit across the sidewalks. Sarah pulled her coat tighter around herself as she walked Emma home from school. For days her mind had been restless, caught between two irreconcilable truths. David had abandoned her once, but he claimed he never knew. And now he swore he would never walk away again. Emma, oblivious to the storm in her mother's heart, skipped at her side, reciting Spanish verbs under her breath. "Yo soy, tú eres, él es." She grinned up at Sarah. "Mama, Daddy says if I keep practicing, I'll speak faster than him one day." Sarah froze. Daddy. The word hung in the air like a fragile crystal. It warmed and terrified her at the same time. She forced a smile. "Just remember, practice is good, but kindness matters more than any word you know." Emma nodded dutifully, but her eyes glowed with excitement. She had already decided that her father wasn't just a name on a page anymore. He was real, flesh and blood, someone who could stumble on skates in Millennium Park and laugh with her as if the years had never been lost. For Sarah, trust was not so easily restored. That evening, David arrived at the motel with takeout boxes of warm noodles and dumplings. Emma squealed in delight. "It smells like the market in Chinatown. Daddy, how did you know?" "I used to eat here with someone I cared about," David said softly, his eyes flicking toward Sarah. She looked away, her jaw tight. They ate together at the small round table. For a fleeting moment it felt like family, chopsticks clicking, Emma chattering about her day, David listening with rapt attention. But beneath it ran an undercurrent of unease. When Emma went to brush her teeth, Sarah leaned across the table, her voice low and sharp. You can't just sweep in with food and promises and think that erases 7 years. David met her glare. I'm not asking for erasure. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to what? Break her heart again? She's a child, David. She doesn't understand what men like you are capable of. David flinched but held his ground. You think I don't know the damage I caused? I live with it every day. But I can't change the past. All I can do is prove myself now. Sarah's voice cracked. Prove yourself to me? Or to her? His gaze softened. Both. The next morning the storm arrived, not from the sky, but from the boardroom. Gregory Hale cornered David outside the company headquarters. His voice was a whisper edged with steel. The rumors are already spreading. You've been seen with a child. People are asking questions. The merger is fragile enough without a scandal. David's shoulders stiffened. She's my daughter. Hale's eyes narrowed. And that's your problem, not ours. If this story leaks, if shareholders panic, you will not just lose the merger. You'll lose your seat. The board will replace you. David's pulse thundered, but he spoke evenly. Maybe it's time they did. Hale sneered. Careful, David. Power is easy to lose. And once it's gone, you'll have nothing left, not even her. The threat chilled him. That night, David stood before Sarah in the motel room, the city lights bleeding through the thin curtains. His face was drawn, his voice heavy. They're threatening me, Sarah. If I claim you and Emma publicly, I lose the company. Sarah crossed her arms, fury flashing in her eyes. So it's the same choice again, isn't it? Them or us? David shook his head violently. No, not this time. I won't let them use you against me. I'll step down if I have to. Her laugh was bitter. You expect me to believe that? You chose them once. Why should I trust you now? His voice broke. Because this time, I know what I'm losing. And I'd rather lose everything else than lose her again. Sarah stared at him, torn apart by his conviction and her own memories. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let her guard down. But scars don't fade simply because someone says the right words. Trust, she whispered, her voice trembling, isn't given. It's earned. And you've barely begun. Over the following week, David tried to prove himself. He walked Emma to school, sat with her in the evenings as she practiced Chinese calligraphy, listened as she sang songs in languages he didn't even recognize. Each time, Sarah watched from the corner, her heart warring with itself. One night, as Emma drifted to sleep, Sarah whispered to David on the balcony, She'll fall in love with you. That's what scares me. Because if you disappear again, you won't just break me. You'll break her. David turned to her, his expression raw. Then I won't disappear. Not ever again. But even as he spoke, his phone buzzed with another warning from the board. His world was collapsing. And soon, he would have to choose. For real this time. The breaking point came at the end of the month. David had been summoned to an emergency board meeting. Cameras flashed as he entered the building, journalists shouting questions. Mr. Johnson, is it true you have a secret daughter? Will this affect the merger? He ignored them, but the damage was done. The whispers had turned into headlines. Inside, the boardroom was a crucible. Gregory Hale slammed the table. This is unacceptable. We built you, David, and we can take you down. If you don't denounce this child publicly, if you don't cut ties, consider yourself finished. David's heart pounded. He saw Emma's face in his mind, her small voice calling him Daddy. He saw Sarah's eyes, full of pride and pain, and in that moment, the decision crystallized. I won't denounce her, David said firmly, because she's mine. and she matters more than this company ever will." The board erupted in fury. Hale's voice cut above the din. "Then you are finished." David stood tall. "So be it." That night, he returned to the motel, stripped of certainty, but not of resolve. Sarah was waiting, arms crossed, eyes searching his face. "Well?" she demanded. David exhaled slowly. "I may have just lost everything, but I didn't lose her." For the first time, Sarah's anger faltered. She saw not the CEO, but the man who had chosen family over empire. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly in a language neither of them understood. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. The test of trust had only begun. But perhaps, just perhaps, they had taken the first step. The boardroom battle was over. The empire of glass and steel that David Johnson had commanded for more than a decade no longer bore his name. By the following morning, the financial press splashed headlines across the country. Johnson resigns amid personal scandal. Merger in jeopardy. Tanaka demands new leadership. For the world, it was corporate drama. For David, it was liberation disguised as disgrace. He stood before the mirror in his penthouse that night, a single suitcase at his side. The man reflected back at him was still impeccably dressed, but the tie hung loose, the eyes weary, the weight of decades of ambition etched into his face. "Who are you now?" he whispered. The mirror didn't answer. Not CEO, not board chairman, not power broker, just a man who had walked away. And yet for the first time in years, his reflection didn't look hollow. There was fear, yes, but also a spark of something truer. He thought of Emma calling him daddy on the ice rink. He thought of Sarah's arms wrapped protectively around her, her eyes burning with both suspicion and hope. He thought of the warmth in that cramped motel room, the laughter over takeout boxes. Maybe this was who he had always wanted to be. Not the empire, not the title. A father. The next morning, David appeared at the motel with his suitcase. Sarah raised an eyebrow as he knocked softly at the door. "You get locked out of your palace?" she asked dryly. David's smile was wry. "Something like that." "I walked away." Sarah studied him, skepticism shadowing her eyes. "From what?" "From all of it. The board, the company, the merger. Tanaka warned me I'd lose everything." His voice softened. "And I did. But not her. Not Emma." Sarah's lips parted, a mix of shock and disbelief. "You actually resigned?" He nodded. "I'd rather face the world with nothing than face her someday and know I chose money over her again." For the first time in years, Sarah's anger cracked. There, beneath the exhaustion, she saw sincerity. Still, her voice was sharp. "You can't just trade one life for another overnight. Being a father isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up, every day." David swallowed hard. "Then let me show up." Emma squealed with delight when she saw his suitcase. "Daddy, are you moving in?" Sarah stiffened, but David crouched to meet his daughter's hopeful eyes. "Not unless your mama says so. But I'm not leaving town. Not again." Emma clapped her hands anyway, her joy untamed. Sarah's heart ached. Trust was fragile, but Emma's love was boundless. In the days that followed, David's life transformed. Gone were the chauffeurs and private jets. He walked Emma to school through slush-covered sidewalks, carrying her backpack when it grew too heavy. He sat at the diner with Sarah during her shifts, rolling up his sleeves to pour coffee when the line grew long. The patrons eyed him curiously, whispers spreading that the disgraced CEO of Johnson International was bussing tables in Nebraska. But David didn't care. For once, he felt useful in a way that balance sheets could never measure. One evening, Emma dragged him to the bathroom mirror after brushing her teeth. "Look," she cried, smudging her reflection with her tiny finger. "That's you, and that's me. We both have the same eyes." David's throat tightened. He crouched beside her, staring at their mirrored faces side by side. The same tilt, the same brown flecks near the iris. Proof undeniable. "You're right," he whispered. "I see myself in you." Then, more quietly, to himself, "And maybe, finally, I see the father I should have been." But shadows still lingered. One night, Sarah found him sitting alone on the motel balcony, staring out at the neon glow of the city. His shoulders slumped, the weight of loss etched deep. "You miss it," she said softly, stepping beside him. David didn't deny it. "It was my life for so long. The meetings, the deals, the power. It defined me." He paused, his voice cracking. "But when I look in the mirror now, I realize it also destroyed me." Sarah crossed her arms, watching him carefully. "And what do you see instead?" He turned to her, eyes raw. "A man who wants to learn how to be a father, even if he's 20 years late." Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to forgive. But forgiveness, she knew, wasn't a switch. It was a slow unraveling. "Show me," she whispered finally. "Show me you mean it, not with words, with your life." David nodded, his resolve hardening. "I will." A week later, Sarah brought home a stack of unpaid bills, her face weary. The diner hours weren't enough, and Emma's future loomed larger than ever. David glanced at the papers, then at Sarah. "Let me help," he said gently. Her eyes narrowed. "We're not charity." "This isn't charity," David replied. "This is family." The word hung between them, heavy and sacred. Slowly, Sarah set down the bills. For the first time, she didn't push his hand away when he reached across the table. That night, David stood in front of the motel bathroom mirror again, Emma tugging at his sleeve. "Daddy, make a funny face!" He crossed his eyes, puffed his cheeks, and Emma collapsed into giggles. Sarah leaned against the doorway, watching. Her arms were crossed, but her lips curved in the faintest smile. And in that moment, David realized something. These small, imperfect fragments, was the life he wanted more than anything. Not the boardroom, not the empire, just laughter echoing against a cracked motel mirror. Still, the world outside hadn't finished with him. One evening, as he closed the diner after helping Sarah wipe down tables, Hiroshi Tanaka appeared in the doorway. His tailored suit looked foreign against the checkered floor, his expression sharp as a blade. "You really gave it up," Tanaka said in accented English. David met his gaze without flinching. "I did." Tanaka studied him, then spoke quietly. "You are a fool, Johnson. You had everything." David glanced toward the back room, where Emma's laughter rang as she showed Sarah her drawings. His chest swelled. "No, Tanaka. For the first time, I do." The older man's eyes narrowed, but he gave a curt nod before leaving, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. Sarah stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "What was that about?" "Just someone reminding me of what I've lost," David said softly, then smiled faintly. "But he doesn't understand what I've gained." For the first time in years, the man in the mirror no longer looked like a stranger. The rain in Seattle rarely fell in torrents. It was a steady curtain, a rhythm that seemed to never end. It clung to the glass windows of the courthouse downtown, turning the city into a watercolor of gray and silver. Sarah stood beneath the awning, Emma's hand clasped tightly in hers. The years of struggle were written into the lines on her face, but her eyes held the fire of someone who had never surrendered. For weeks after David's resignation, Sarah had wrestled with whether to let him back into their lives. Trust was fragile, and though his actions had spoken more than words, her wounds ran deep. But then came the discovery. A file buried deep in the archives of Johnson International. Evidence that the board, not David, had orchestrated his disappearance from her life. David had found it. Now, in Seattle, he was ready to prove the truth. Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights hummed above rows of polished wooden benches. At the front, David stood tall, the report in his hand, his voice steady though his heart thundered. Beside him sat Thomas Carter, his longtime lawyer and friend, the only one who had stayed when the empire collapsed. "This," David declared, lifting the file, "is the evidence of what tore my family apart 7 years ago." Pages rustled as the judge and counsel examined the documents, falsified emails, forged signatures, memos threatening Sarah's livelihood should David remain with her. Gregory Hale's name appeared again and again, the architect of the lies. Sarah sat in the gallery, her breath caught in her chest. For years, she had believed she was abandoned. For years, she had built her armor from betrayal. Now the truth unfolded before her eyes, shattering everything she thought she knew. Emma sat beside her, wide-eyed. She didn't understand the legal terms, but she understood enough. Daddy had not left because he didn't want them. Daddy had been forced away. The courtroom was tense as the judge spoke. "This is serious. If these documents are genuine, Mr. Johnson, you were not only wronged personally, but professionally. Fraud on this scale demands investigation." David's voice trembled but did not falter. "I don't care about the fraud. I don't care about the empire. I care that my daughter and the woman I loved lived 7 years believing I abandoned them. That is the injustice I want the world to see." Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. For the first time, she saw not the CEO, not the empire builder, but the man she had once loved, the man who had chosen her laughter over luxury in those early days. Outside, the rain continued to fall, steady and cleansing. David found Sarah and Emma on the courthouse steps. His suit was damp, his hair plastered to his forehead, but he didn't care. He looked at them with eyes raw and pleading. "Sarah," he said softly, "I can't undo the past, but now you know the truth. I never left because I wanted to. I left because they forced me, and I've spent every day since regretting it." Sarah's lips trembled. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him the pain still mattered more than the excuses. But when she looked at him, standing soaked in the Seattle rain, stripped of power and pride, she saw a man who had chosen to lose everything just to stand before her now. Emma tugged at her hand, her small voice rising above the rain. "Mama, can we go to him?" Sarah's defenses cracked. She released Emma's hand. The little girl ran forward, straight into David's arms. He caught her, lifting her off the ground, pressing his face into her hair as tears mixed with rain. "Hi, Daddy," Emma whispered, her voice trembling but sure. Then, in perfect Japanese, she added, "Watashi wa Emma desu." I am Emma. David's heart shattered and healed all at once. He held her tightly, whispering back, "My Emma, my daughter." Sarah stood a few steps away, her tears mingling with the rain. For 7 years, she had carried anger like armor. But now, watching them together, she felt the first crack of forgiveness. That evening, the three of them sat in a quiet cafe near Pike Place Market. The rain pattered against the windows, neon lights reflecting in the puddles outside. Emma slurped hot chocolate, humming to herself as she scribbled words in 3 different languages on a napkin. David looked across the table at Sarah. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but let me be here. Let me be part of her life. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll wait." Sarah studied him. The man she had once loved, the man she had hated, the man who had fought his way back. Slowly, she nodded. "I can't promise everything, David. But I can promise this. You won't be shut out anymore." Relief washed over him, visible in the way his shoulders eased, the way his eyes softened. For the first time in years, he felt like he was home. The next day, Emma insisted they visit the waterfront. The rain had eased to a drizzle, the air sharp with salt. She ran ahead, pointing at the ferries, shouting out words in English, French, and Japanese as though naming the world would make it hers. Sarah and David walked behind, their steps slow. "She's remarkable," David murmured. Sarah smiled faintly. "She's ours." The word hung between them, fragile but undeniable. For the first time, Sarah allowed her hand to brush his. He didn't take it, not yet, but the touch alone was enough, a signal that the walls she had built were beginning to crumble. That night, as rain drummed softly against the motel roof, Emma curled between them on the bed, her small body warm and steady. Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Forgiveness would take time. Trust would take longer. But she realized now that David had chosen, truly chosen, to put them first. And for the first time in 7 years, she let herself imagine a future not of survival, but of family. The rain had stopped. Morning light broke through the clouds over Seattle, turning the wet streets into rivers of silver. For the first time in years, Sarah woke not to the sound of worry pressing at her chest, but to the quiet rhythm of her daughter's breathing. Emma lay curled between her and David, her small face peaceful, her hand resting gently on her father's arm. Sarah turned her head. David was awake, watching Emma with an expression Sarah had never seen before. It wasn't the steely gaze of a CEO. It was tender, unguarded, raw. "She dreams in words," David whispered, smiling faintly. "I can hear her murmuring different languages when she sleeps." Sarah's throat tightened. "She's always done that. Sometimes I wonder if she was born knowing more than I ever could." David's smile softened. "She got it from us. From both of us." For the first time, Sarah didn't flinch at the word us. In the weeks that followed, their lives settled into a rhythm both ordinary and extraordinary. David rented a modest townhouse near the harbor, nothing like the penthouse he had left behind in Chicago. He filled the space not with art and marble, but with Emma's drawings taped to the refrigerator and bookshelves crammed with dictionaries and storybooks in every language she could find. He walked her to school each morning, no longer a man chauffeured in black cars, but a father carrying her backpack and laughing at her riddles. He spent afternoons at the diner, learning to brew coffee, wiping down counters beside Sarah. Patrons whispered about the disgraced CEO bussing tables, but Sarah noticed something they didn't. For the first time, David looked alive. One evening after closing the diner, Sarah found David waiting outside with Emma perched on his shoulders. The little girl waved a paper in her hand.
"Mama, look! I won a citywide essay contest. They said my words sounded like music."
Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, pride swelling. David stood beside them, his hand brushing Sarah's. For once, she didn't pull away. But healing was not without its tests. One rainy night, Sarah confessed her fear. "What if you regret this? What if one day you wake up and miss the boardrooms, the headlines, the empire? What if we're just a stopgap before you run back to that world?" David's expression was solemn. He led her to the mirror above the diner sink, streaked with soap and steam. "Look," he said, pointing to their reflections. His weary but steady, hers fierce and protective, Emma's taped drawings decorating the wall behind them. "This is my empire now. A family. A chance to be the man I should have been all along. If I walk away from this, Sarah, I lose myself again, and I can't survive that twice." Sarah studied his face. For the first time, she believed him. Spring arrived, and with it, an invitation. Dr. Chen wrote to say Emma had been offered a scholarship to a prestigious program for gifted children in New York, full tuition, mentorship, opportunities that could change her future. Sarah's instinct was to hesitate. She had fought so long to protect Emma from being turned into a spectacle. But when Emma held the letter to her chest, her eyes shining with joy, Sarah knew she couldn't stand in the way of her daughter's light. The night before they left for New York, Emma curled up between her parents, whispering, "Mama, Daddy, I don't care about fancy schools as long as you're both with me." David kissed her forehead. "We'll always be with you. No board, no company, no storm will ever take us apart again." Sarah's tears spilled quietly, but this time they were tears of release. Months later, at a small recital in Manhattan, Emma stood on stage, reciting a poem she had written in 3 languages, weaving them into one seamless story about belonging. The audience erupted in applause, but Sarah only watched her daughter's glowing face. Beside her, David reached for her hand. She let him hold it. "Do you see her?" he whispered, pride breaking in his voice. "That's our legacy. Not skyscrapers, not mergers. Her." Sarah turned, meeting his eyes. For years, she had doubted him. For years, she had built walls to protect her heart. But in that moment, she saw not the CEO who had once walked away, but the man who had returned and stayed. She squeezed his hand. "Family above everything. That's what matters." David nodded, tears glistening. Family above CEO. Life was not perfect. Bills still arrived, the diner still demanded long hours, but the house was full of laughter now. Emma teaching her parents phrases in Mandarin, David fumbling through them, Sarah laughing until her sides hurt. On warm evenings, they walked together along the harbor, Emma skipping ahead, calling out words in different languages to strangers and making them smile. And always David walked with Sarah, not ahead of her, not behind her, but beside her. One night, as the city lights reflected across the water, Emma tugged at her parents' hands. "Can we promise something? No matter where we live, no matter what happens, we stay together. Always." Sarah's voice caught. "Yes, sweetheart. Always." David's voice joined hers, steady and sure. "Always." The rain began to fall again, light and steady, washing the streets in silver. But this time, it felt less like sorrow and more like blessing. And as they walked beneath the soft Seattle rain, 3 hands clasped together, they knew. Titles fade, fortunes crumble, empires fall. But family, the simple, unbreakable bond of love and forgiveness, was stronger than anything the world could take away. This story reminds us that money and titles may fade, but love, forgiveness, and family last forever. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. It means so much. If stories of healing and second chances touch your heart, we'd love for you to subscribe and join our little community.